Welcome back. Sarah here. And Kady.
It's me.
Today, we're going to revisit a tag that I created last year, the Asians on TarotTube tag. Last year, when I created the Asians on TarotTube tag, it was because I have a fair amount of Asian tarot friends in real life, and I just wanted to find more Asian tarot friends to connect with online. Even though Kady is not an active part of TarotTube, like she doesn't make YouTube videos, we have had a lot of conversations about what it means to be Asian, what it means to find Asian friends, how being Asian influences like us doing tarot. So I just thought it would be interesting to interview one of my like real life tarot friends here and just share her presence with you all. Before we get into the prompts, is there anything you want to say, or should we just get into the prompts, Kady?
I don't know. There's nothing I want to say. I was
Cut. Quick plug here. Kady and I met through the group SoCal Asian Interactive, which is an online and in-person meetup group. So it is a Discord server where we have a lot of channels and chat rooms for people to just connect. The target demographic of our group is Asians in SoCal or Southern California, but the group is open for anyone to join. The main requirement is really just don't be a jerk, really, and don't be like racist towards Asians. That would really defeat the point of you joining an Asian group. But yeah, so even though the group is SoCal Asian Interactive, we do encourage and are open for anyone to join. I will put the link in the description. Kady and I have met through that group, and we've met a lot of other tarot friends through that group too. So if you're interested in chatting with us and or meeting other Asian friends and or tarot friends, like, join us. So I'll read the questions and share a little bit about what I answered, and then Kady can share about herself and what her answers are for these questions. So the first question is introduce yourself. Share a little bit about your Asian identity. Anything you'd like to share. Could be your family, history, upbringing, and or connection with other Asian diaspora. So for me, I am a child of Vietnamese immigrants. So my dad came here when he was 10. My mom came here after she was married. I grew up like around a lot of other Vietnamese and other Asian folks. I almost took being Asian like for granted because I was so used to seeing Vietnamese people everywhere, especially like Vietnamese elders like constantly chastising me or praising me, and I was like, oh yeah, being Vietnamese is like no big deal, being Asian is like no big deal. But now I'm at a point where I am trying to reconnect more with being Vietnamese and having Vietnamese friends and having Vietnamese history, and I wasn't interested in this kind of stuff before as a teen. But that's my general Asian identity.
Thanks for sharing that. My upbringing was also very similar to yours in that I grew up in an area with a lot of Vietnamese people. I grew up on the east side of San Jose, and I was adjacent to the Little Saigon community, which is one of the two largest Vietnamese diaspora communities in America, along with Orange County, Little Saigon, that also had a lot of Viet people. So we were around a lot of people that looked like us, it seemed like. My parents' migration journey, my dad came over in 1980, and he was about 20 by the time he came over. And then my mom came over in her early 20s in the 90s. And both my parents were sponsored on refugee visas, and they met in the Midwest. They moved to California and settled there when the Vietnamese community was like still budding. And so me and my younger brother, we pretty much had a very suburban life growing up in San Jose. I remember growing up in high school, there were a lot of Vietnamese ABGs. And for folks that don't know, ABG stands for Asian Baby Girl. And what's funny is that a lot of these ABGs were also overachievers too. It seemed like everyone in high school was an overachiever, whether you were an athlete, whether you were a theater kid. There's a lot of pride that I have around my identity as a Vietnamese American. And I also did find that there weren't a lot of people I could relate to as someone who had more creative aspirations in my career as a Vietnamese American.
Were you involved in VSAs or Vietnamese student associations as a student?
That's a good question. So I wasn't involved in the VSAs in high school. However, the other way I was involved in Vietnamese community with other people my age was that I grew up going to a Vietnamese Catholic Girl Scout troop. And it's funny because like I was raised Buddhist, and I think my parents just wanted me to like be a Girl Scout. You get good life skills, you get badges, you get to sell cookies. I don't know. There weren't a lot of like Vietnamese scout troops that aligned with like being affiliated with like Buddhism. But yeah, basically I was around like other Viet kids my age.
But via Catholic Girl Scouts.
Scouts.
It's so funny being Asian because just we learn about new groups every day.
Yeah.
Like I never thought Vietnamese Catholic Girl Scouts existed.
Yeah, they exist. And I think maybe some people will recognize like the name like Hung Dao, but that's like Vietnamese Scouts pretty much. And that was what I was a part of like growing up.
It sounds like you've had like pretty strong connection to being Vietnamese like all throughout growing up.
Yeah.
Was there ever a point when you felt like you wanted to hide being Vietnamese, or like you wish you were like another Asian or like not Asian?
After I graduated high school and was studying film, the film departments of the schools that I was going to just didn't have a lot of representation of like Vietnamese people, Asians in that program. They were often Asians of other ethnicities, and so usually like East Asians. There was this Vietnamese American author that visited UCLA for a talk. Her name was Thi Bui. I don't know if you've heard of her. She wrote the graphic novel The Best We Could Do. One of the questions I asked her was, how do I cope with being the only Vietnamese person that I know of in the screenwriting concentration at UCLA? She basically empathized with the feeling of being a minority, and not just like a minority of like being an Asian woman, but also being a Southeast Asian woman. I think now there's more Vietnamese people in like the field that we're in entertainment, but I feel like when I was in college, there wasn't as much of that representation, and those were the times I wanted to be a different race. Like I wanted to be like a white guy, because I would see like mediocre white guys doing improv in Los Angeles, and I'm like, I could do that.
It's interesting thinking about Asian identity, because again, like growing up, like it was something like I was happy to have because it made me different from other people, but actually because there were so many Vietnamese people in my high school, my family has Chinese roots, that's why my last name is Tang. I would verbally identify as like Chinese American instead of Vietnamese American, because I thought being Chinese, being East Asian was like cooler than being Vietnamese. But I mentioned this because I think it's just interesting to think about the ways that our identities change and shift as we elevate certain things and we like start downplaying certain things over time. And it's actually because of Kady that I have become more in touch with and more interested in learning about what it means to be Vietnamese.
I'm so flattered.
Yeah. The fact that like Kady wrote in her notes here that like she knows that there were second refugee waves and third refugee waves, I didn't even know that. My husband Andy and I thought that they were just like one big wave, I guess. We didn't know that there were like different waves of refugees coming to the US. And you know, I was never really interested in history back then. So it's fascinating to hear like bite-sized pieces of what I can understand when you talk about history. These historical things like have made an impact on us, future generations.
I'm curious to know like what wave do you think your family is, if you feel comfortable sharing?
Let's see, my dad was born in the 60s, so he literally probably came here in like 1975 or something. My mom was born in the 70s. If she came here after she was married, that means she probably came here in the 90s. So 70s versus 90s.
I'll share a little bit of the refugee waves that my parents came from, because that affects my identity. My dad came over during the second wave of refugees when he did immigrate over in 1980. And before that, he was in a refugee camp in Thailand. For my mother, I knew that her extended family came over to the States in the first wave. So my mom came over on that third wave of Vietnamese refugees. Thanks to our extended family members that came over during the first wave, they were helping other families kind of like re-establish pretty much. So I just think it's interesting how patterns of migration work. And it's just like really powerful.
So now that we've introduced like Asian identity, the next prompt is your family notably religious, spiritual, or superstitious? How has that influenced your current spirituality? My family was sort of Buddhist, and I've experienced going to a priestess like a couple of times. And I've shared about how that like low-key traumatized me, because my parents would ask the priestess questions about me while I was sitting there in the room with them. And it just felt very like insulting for me as a teen to be like, I speak Vietnamese and English. You guys could just talk to me, but you're not understanding me. The fact that you had to go to like this woman to speak on my behalf while I'm here in the room with me was just very insulting.
Oh my God.
Now that you mentioned like Catholic Girl Scouts, I was actually a part of a Buddhist temple youth group. They call it Yaren Phaktu, like Buddhist family. I was a part of this Buddhist family, Buddhist youth group, all middle school. So like every Sundays, we would go to temple in the morning and do activities, and we would occasionally have retreats and stuff. But that was also like a really bad time for me, because I felt very sheltered compared to the other kids. And the other kids would be like cussing or like flirting. And yes, I was sheltered, but I still don't think it's in good taste to do that like on Buddhist temple grounds.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just felt really out of place, did not have a good time in that Buddhist temple youth group. That also turned me off from Buddhism in general.
Yeah.
Because not only were the elders not a safe space for me to be around, even the other kids like at Buddhist temple were not really my type of people. And I don't know if that like made me secular, but even so, I just don't have any like mystical or spiritual like connections. But now as an adult, I am curious about exploring it more now that I have people who like are more my type of people.
Yeah.
I didn't even talk about my family. That was just me. I'll just say about my family, like my family is not that religious or spiritual. My dad is into philosophy, but they have not really conveyed or passed on to me any big notions of spirituality or religion. How about your family? Being
My family,
religious, spiritual, or superstitious, and how has that influenced your current spirituality?
I think that my dad may have been agnostic or just a-religious growing up. My mom, who's like the opposite of agnostic, like she was a devout Buddhist. Whenever we drove in the car, she always loved putting like a charm or a photo of Guan. So my mom would hang up a photo of like Guan on that rearview mirror, and then whenever my dad was taking the family car out, he would like take that photo down.
Wow.
Just like the first thing he would do.
Couldn't
like,
even stand to have it there.
Yeah,
Wow.
just like the first thing he would do, like before like adjusting the mirrors, like he would just like take that photo of like Guan down, and my mom would just be like, "Why do you keep taking that photo down?" My dad's always like, "Oh, it's like swinging around, it's like distracting or whatever." To me, it showed his like affiliation, how he just doesn't really care, for the most part.
But he cared enough to like take it down. Like he could have just left it.
I know, he could have just
So
like
it's
left
interesting.
it. It's not like that distracting. So my mom was a devout and is a devout Buddhist, and growing up, she would take me to temple on weekends and go to like temple service. I was curious about Buddhism, so I would just like go with her. She was raised Pure Land Buddhist and kind of raised me and my brother that way. Pure Land Buddhism is kind of around like chanting and devotion over like Amida Buddha. And so oftentimes monastics will like chant his name several times, and lay people will be encouraged to do the same, to chant Amida Buddha's name over and over again, to reach enlightenment or to reach like insight of some sort. So that was the school of Buddhism that my mom was in. I feel like I'm giving like a history breakdown. I didn't realize I knew this much, and I'm not like an expert, I'm not like an academic or anything.
You definitely know more than me, and it's just cool hearing these things like in relation to someone's life instead of just in a textbook.
I have like lived experiences with this stuff, but I didn't really understand it because I would experience all of this in like Vietnamese, which is not my primary language. And then later in life as an adult, I would like do Wikipedia binges, and I'm like, okay, I have the English context to understand what all of this was going on when I was growing up in Vietnamese. And so my mom herself, like she is superstitious. She grew up going to a lot of Thai boy, like fortune tellers, like back in Vietnam. She received a reading that she was gonna have like a birthmark or something like that, and that she was gonna have like a hard life and stuff. And then the fall of Saigon happened when she was like about 8 or something like that. How has that influenced my current spirituality? I still practice like Pure Land Buddhism, and at the same time I practice another school of Buddhism, which is the Plum Village lineage, which is under Zen Vietnamese like Buddhism. So I would say I'm kind of like a dual practitioner of like Pure Land Buddhism and Zen/Chan Buddhism. Pure Land Buddhism is kind of more about, I guess it's more about like faith and devotion to like the rituals that you do and like the chanting. Zen Buddhism is kind of more into like using meditation and mindfulness towards like insight.
When you're being spiritual, do you feel connected to your mom that way, or does your mom like not really occur to you when you're being spiritual?
Yeah, I think my journey to being spiritual as an adult has led to me and my mother having a deeper connection. On her birthday and on like Mother's Day, I started gifting her books of Thich Nhat Hanh. So it's just kind of been like a yearly thing where like I gift her books of his teachings, and then I also gift books of his teachings to my aunt, who is my mom's sister. Sometimes my mom will kind of ask me on like phone calls like how I'm doing, and then I'll just kind of share with my mom like, oh, I just finished watching like a Dharma talk over Zoom, or I finished, you know, listening to a Dharma talk at like Deer Park Monastery. Deer Park Monastery is a temple in the San Diego County area, and that monastery is in the lineage of like the Plum Village tradition.
Wow.
So
you really are so knowledgeable. You like know. That's really, really cool.
Yeah. My mom, she's very proud, I guess. Like, she just thinks it's nice that I'm very kind of like enthusiastic about this thing, and she likes that it's just something that like we can like connect on. And sometimes when there's like a Vietnamese Buddhist holiday, like I'll wish her like, oh, happy like Vu Lang or whatever, and then I'll kind of send her like a thing about it, and then she kind of sends me like, oh, like Thich Nhat Hanh did like a talk about like motherhood, like your connection with your mother, and then she'll kind of like share with me this like spiritual teaching. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, I'm glad I never had to go through what you went through, where your parents use Buddhism to like,
oh yeah, like as a punishment. Yeah,
I know.
They would, yeah, when I was like acting out, they would be like, oh, you need to like get schooled basically, and just bring me to temple and like force me to be there. But it's okay. I learned from the experience, and now I'm learning from other experiences here.
Yeah.
So next question, does your family know that you do tarot? Have they had any opinion or response? My dad does know, but he's never commented or asked. Strangely, I think one of my cousins has mentioned watching one of my videos, and I was like, I forget that being out on the internet, like anyone can find it. My younger sibling, actually, Avery, they also do tarot. And it's funny because when I was first learning about tarot in like August 2020, soon after that, I called them up and I was like, oh my God, I like do tarot now. And they were like, oh, cool. I like just found out about tarot recently. And I was like, wow, look at us. Even living apart, we are still finding similar hobbies around the same times. Aww. If y'all remember in the last video when I shared the prompts, I included this question because one of my friends had mentioned that her mom was like, oh, so you do tarot? Can you do a reading about when you're gonna have kids? So it turns out this was that friend. It was her mom.
So I did come out to my parent. I came out to them as like a tarot reader because I was afraid, not like afraid. I was curious as to what their reaction would be because I didn't have any like preconceived notion that they would think it's like weird, but it just felt like a very vulnerable thing to admit to your parents that I do this type of like divination. And so I like came out to my parents as a tarot reader the same way one would come out as like queer, I guess, because that is something about myself. Like I am like bi, like I am queer.
Because even though we have like priestesses and even though Vietnamese people and other Asians, we do have like divination methods, like tarot isn't as common like among what we know of our Vietnamese communities.
Yeah, exactly. Like I feel like tarot isn't a form of divination in the Vietnamese community. When Vietnamese people do practice tarot, it's usually people like our age, or it's people
like the more Americanized people.
Yeah, like the more like Americanized people. And even I've witnessed like practitioners in Vietnam that do tarot or like Gen Z or like millennial. So it's just kind of more something that like is becoming trendy with like younger Vietnamese people, at least from what I've noticed when I watch Vietnamese tarot too.
That's true. She doesn't keep track too much of like the English side of tarot too, but Vietnamese tarot too. She knows all the channels.
I guess so. I did tell my parents in the car, and I was kind of sneaky about it. I brought like a travel mini-sized tarot deck with me, and I was playing with my Morgan Greer tarot in the car with them, and then my mom saw me shuffling with like my tarot decks, and she asked me like, oh, like what are those, like do you read with those? And then I was like, I'm glad you asked because I'm gonna come out now. And that was basically when I shared with my mom that I do tarot as like a divination practice. In fact, I even have clients that pay me occasionally, and my mom was like so intrigued and so impressed that I made like a side hustle out of like charging people for like readings. She started asking me like, you know, very curious questions about how I knew the meanings to like certain cards and kind of what goes through my mind whenever I do a reading. And then I kind of explained to my mom kind of what intuition feels like to me. Like she just thought it was very cool, and she was asking kind of like follow-up questions. My dad didn't really ask like follow-up questions, but he thought it was like interesting and didn't really reject it. So he was like very accepting of it. And so during that car ride, I shared with my mom some Vietnamese language just like definitions on what like tarot is. It kind of gave her a more concrete context to like, you know, what it is, like the origins and stuff. And then the next question she asked is like, have you ever used tarot to find out when you're gonna have children? And I was just like, that's not why.
It's like, tell me you're Asian without telling me you're Asian.
I know. I was like, oh, not yet. I didn't like tell my mom that that's just not what I use like divination for, like, but I get it. I think she wants to be a grandmother.
It's just so surprising and not surprising that that's like one of the first questions she asked. Like, either that or can you tell me like if you're gonna get an A, or, you know, or like if you're gonna be a doctor, you know. I think it's cool to hear that you have such a relationship with your parents that you can talk with, at least your mom even, about these things, because I don't have conversations with my parents like that. And one of my motivations for including this question was because I know a lot of people, like, they don't talk to their parents or their family about doing tarot. So, but of course, like, the times are changing and people's families are different.
Yeah.
All right, next prompt. Do you feel like your Asian identity and experiences affect how you do tarot? I know that I have a strong, like, question the norm lens. Even if I don't consciously bring it, it's always there at the back of my mind. Like, how do I interpret these cards differently from how someone else would interpret them? How do I take these book interpretations and like give it a new spin that I'm seeing it in my own way? I just really hate feeling boxed in by expectations or what I should or shouldn't be doing. It's probably like my personality anyway, but I feel like it's also pretty influenced by my Asian upbringing. I just really hate the feeling of like being compared to other people, being compared to other kids, being told that you need to do this thing because like all the other kids are doing it. Either all the other kids in your school or all your cousins are doing it. All the other parents are doing this, so my parents are doing it too. I just really hated that like everyone's doing this, so I should be doing what they do. That's the undercurrent that runs through like my tarot readings and tarot experiences.
For my tarot, I do have a positive connotation when I think of like my Buddhist like upbringing. When I started studying Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings like as an adult, a lot of his teachings regarding mindfulness and other ways of like approaching life, that definitely influences the readings that I do on myself, and also the readings I do for like, you know, clients as well. When I do readings for like, you know, like other people, when I interpret the cards through like a Buddhist lens, it feels very authentic to kind of like my outlook on life and where I seek wisdom. And I feel like I also seek wisdom just kind of from like my Vietnamese like upbringing. So part of that Vietnamese upbringing is just like being Buddhist, because Buddhism is just kind of so prevalent in our culture. Yeah, that's how I feel like my Asian experiences like affect my tarot.
Having gotten a reading from you once and just having experienced the way that you read and the way that you are as a person in conversations, the way that you present is very like holding space. I don't know too much about Buddhism despite having been forced to go to too many Buddhist temples, but like it feels very Buddhist to actually just be able to hold space and to like reserve judgment on things. Like you are someone who feels like you just hold space for things and you let the feelings just sit there. Whereas the way that I might approach a reading is like the questions I want to ask are like, who told you that you need to doubt yourself? Or like, where did you learn this? And what do you need to tell yourself instead? So I do have a very like active counter the automatic thought or like break the norm idea and approach. But you're just more like neutrally looking at this kind of thing.
Yeah, I like the way you say that. I think about like deep listening, and that was something that I learned from, you know, one of like Thich Nhat Hanh's like teachings about like how to go about like deep listening, and how meditation can also be relational. When you're deeply listening to somebody, you're also practicing meditation by being with that person, and you're kind of taking yourself out of the thoughts that come up when you're listening to that person. So I appreciate you for bringing that up.
It's cool to see that like the Buddhism, the practices, the teachings, like there's something that you really internalize whether you're conscious about using them or not. All right, the next prompt is, are there any tarot cards that particularly resonate with you about your Asian experiences?
Okay. Let's see if I can... Where is it?
So, to recap, the two cards that I mentioned were Judgment and the Devil. This is from the Way of the Panda Tarot by Kimberly Tsan. What really spoke to me about Judgment was learning to let go of resentments and old baggage that no longer serve me. I carried a lot of teenage angst that carried into like my early adulthood as well. I internalized a lot of expectations from other people on how I should live, how I should be as a human being, basically trying to please everybody else but me. So the Judgment card really speaks to me, especially as an Asian person, because it reminds me that The only things that matter are the things that I choose to make matter. I can let go of these old things at any time. Not that it's an easy process, but I can make the choice to let go and process and work through these things and let them go. And the devil card spoke to me because, similarly to talking about like baggage and stuff, like the only thing that's really holding me back is me. Like, I don't live with my parents anymore. I don't have to continue letting the ways that they hurt me in the past hurt me now in the present. Not just parents, but like old experiences, other people, kids, you know, experiences that have hurt me in the past. I don't have to keep wallowing in them and letting them like affect me so negatively in the present.
For me, the Fool card is the beginning of one embarking on their journey. And I think about my ancestors' journey as refugees. The Fool journey and the refugee journey has like parallels to it. This card happens to be represented by the city of like Hanoi. This Fool has on an ao dai and a nong la and is standing in front of like the famous lake in Hanoi. The other card that I feel like represents the Asian experience to me is like the Temperance card, because I think this card really embodies balance and like resilience. I think a lot about my grandmother's journey. She lived through the first Indo-Chinese War and then lived through like the second Indo-Chinese War, also known as like the Vietnam War. She witnessed like French and Japanese like occupation, and I just think about her journey of like resilience a lot, and that really is like the Temperance to me. And I guess in a way my grandma kind of embodies like Empress energy to me, because like how nurturing I remember that she was. When I think of like the Empress card, it at least in this context, like it represents like grandma energy. So yeah, that I guess I can share like the fourth one. I don't know, like my smattering of cards. I like that this Magician card is represented by like Ho Chi Minh City, also known as like Saigon. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be joyful as like an Asian person or like a Vietnamese person. I think the term like Black joy is something that is like a thing, and I think that Asian joy is maybe like not as common as like a saying as like Black joy. That card is about kind of like transformation of your situation, and much like what came up for me with like the Temperance card, which was about like balance, the Magician is kind of about like alchemizing things out of your situation.
In a recent video where I shared some of my favorite Magician cards and some like Magician revelations or memories that I had, I associated the Magician with play. Specifically Asian immigrants, like they tend to not feel as much joy or allow themselves to feel joy. And my dad and I were just having a conversation the other day, and he said that in Vietnam, like when he was growing up, it was not the norm to like feel happy. Like it was part of the culture to just not be happy with yourself. And that kind of carries over here too, whether it's because of the Vietnam War, like the trauma from the war, or just Vietnamese culture too. Like it's just interesting to notice that like in our parents' generation, some people just don't allow themselves to feel joy. Not just to feel joy, but like to create things, to indulge, to just do whatever their heart desires. Not that all Asian immigrants are like sad and, you know, miserable, but it definitely reminds me of some of the experiences I had growing up with my parents. Like I wish that they would have treated themselves better. I really like what you mentioned with Temperance. I never thought about Temperance being associated with resilience before. It makes a lot of sense. So it's a new interpretation.
Yeah.
Next we have, why do you want to find other Asian tarot friends? I found Asian friends first before I found other tarot friends. Growing up and hearing your parents and family members talk in a different language just changes your brain in a way that I don't think other bilingual kids have grown up with. And because tarot is like just a part of my identity now, and because I use tarot to reflect on and think about my identity, it just makes sense that I would want to find other Asian tarot friends, because whether or not our readings are about identity, whether or not we're always talking about being Asian like all the time, we're just here vibing as Asians. I think it's just knowing that we have like shared experiences and somewhat of shared outlooks on the world. It makes me just want to keep seeking out more Asian tarot friends to find out more like about tarot through your lens and more about being Asian through your lens too.
For me, I really care about community. That's really one of what I value in life. When I'm in community with others where I feel like I belong, I feel like that's when I can feel witnessed, and that's when I feel like I can begin like my healing journey, because there is space in that community to make me feel seen for who I am. Oftentimes I feel like when I'm kind of in spaces with other tarot practitioners or magic practitioners, identity is always going to come up in the magical practice that I do, because identity is just, it's just the core of like who we are at the end of the day, and like our upbringing. For me, I would want to have more Asian tarot friends, because there would just be less explaining that one has to do. You're in a tarot space with someone and you're kind of engaging with someone about identity, and like you don't have to explain like this is what it means to be Asian, because that person already knows. Whereas I feel like sometimes when I'm in online spaces where it's a tarot space but it's not necessarily an Asian specific like tarot space, it feels like I have to explain certain things, which is fine, because I don't mind educating others and I don't mind including others. I just know that at the end of the day, like they're not going to exactly know like my upbringing of what it's like being Buddhist and how I bring that into tarot, or they're not going to know that I celebrate certain like Vietnamese holidays and like that is part of like my spiritual practice and like my tarot practice. I also like that at our tarot like meetups that we have at your house, I like that we can have just like inside jokes, like that one time when you were passing about around like yo sun or something like that.
Oh yeah,
like,
the green oil, the smelly oil.
I know, like the
everyone was
smelly
taking
oil.
a whiff, like, and the Vietnamese friends were like, the nostalgia.
And it was like 9 p.m. We were all like tired, and I think because we were all tired, our tolerance for just like politeness or whatever just like went away, so we were a little bit like more chaotic. And then at a certain point, like we were just passing around like your yo sun, just like smelling it, and it's just funny to have like those like inside jokes. So
yeah, I can't explain it, but I have this feeling of just feeling more connected with my real life friends, who all happen to be like my Asian tarot friends, compared to people that I talk with online. And granted, that could be partly because of the medium, because I do genuinely connect better like in person with people than only online. It just makes me curious though, like if there are other Asian tarot friends I could meet online, could I feel as connected to them as I do with my real life Asian tarot friends? So if you're Asian and into tarot, like comment below. Well, let's try to connect and let me see if I can connect with you. You're so funny.
You're so funny, Sarah.
All right, and the last prompt here is lastly, show and tell a deck. This could be any deck. It doesn't have to be specifically Asian related. And you can just share why you want to share this deck. In my last video, I shared the Way of the Panda Tarot by Kimberly San. Kim is also Asian diaspora, and she's also very like anti-hustle culture. She's also like an Asian creative, like me, like us. I just feel very inspired seeing this beautiful deck out in the world. Oh, this was illustrated by Celia LaBelle. So Kim didn't illustrate it, but she did create like the themes for it, the ideas for it. It's just very, very wholesome and very like break the norm. It's very like embrace your cuddle side, your sweet side, your inner child. I'm just so happy that like that this deck exists. I think like every Asian needs to have this. I didn't make the rules, but every Asian needs to have this.
I need to get this deck too.
This deck just really, really speaks to me as an Asian person and as someone who hopes that more Asian people can get connected with their inner children.
The deck that I chose to share is the Gwen Tarot, and this is by Yui Canva, who is the artist. Yui is a tarot creator and artist who is Vietnamese, and I believe currently based in Bangkok. I saw that there was a metaphysical store in Saigon that was selling this deck on discount. I asked my mom for advice on how I can get a hold of that deck. She told me just go ahead and order and just put in the address as my family friend. And
so it went from the shop to your family friend's house, to your other family friend in Orange County, and then finally to you.
Yeah, finally.
So it's just really made a whole pilgrimage over here.
Yeah, no, it made a whole like pilgrimage. I hope it flew like first class. I think it might have flown economy class from like Vietnam Air or something like that. The style is very Rider-Waite Smith. However, the artist has added his own like major arcana, like the blank card here. He also likes to attach major arcanas and the court cards to certain cities that resonate with his own personal travels. And this tarot deck is attached to like a narrative. Like the guidebook is basically from the perspective of like characters that he created and their point of view and how they're experiencing life and heartbreak. So an example is like with this major arcana card, the Star, it's based in Malaysia. This King of Cups card is based on some islands in Vietnam. And what's really cool is like this Queen of Cups card is based in Vung Tau.
It's a beach town.
Yeah, it's a beach town. It was also a town where a lot of Vietnamese refugees kind of left and like made the journey, fled from there in general, you know, to escape like the war and like post-war and stuff.
That's so cool that you like know of the history of and the context of some of these cities from your own perspective. I feel like that also would affect some of your readings or at least interpretations of the cards.
You know, for example, with that like Queen of Cups being based in like Vung Tau, that is the card represented by water. I think it's really inspiring to have this artist who is from Vietnam really place a lot of Vietnamese heritage and culture like into these cards. And I feel like me as a Vietnamese diasporic person, it's just very inspiring for me to just have this as part of my practice and to be really fascinated and humbled by how much a young Vietnamese like native person can know about just like, you know, Vietnamese history, like culture and stuff. Yui, the artist, is only I think 24 at the moment. Wow. The last time I knew. So wow. He's a little younger than us. And I think that what he's accomplished with this deck and like some other decks that he's worked on is just like really incredible for like his age. So yeah.
Well, Yui and Kimberly San and all the other Asian deck creators out there, you all are doing great work. I hope y'all keep doing whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
Well, that is all the 7 prompts. We've been filming for over an hour.
I know.
I'm glad that Kady could come on and do a little chat with me. I mean, a long chat, but still a fun chat nonetheless. If y'all have any questions for Kady, topics, requests, ideas for future videos or future chats, you know, just let me know. All right, so we will close out here. Thank you again, Kady. Thank you all for watching and sticking with us this far. All right, that is all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Bye. I'm done!
Yui was, he still exists. Let me say that one more time.
So that is the 7 prompts. Told me for over an hour. I see Kady's like,
oh, when am I supposed to like lean in?
Okay.
I was like,
it's okay. This is the second video we filmed. I don't know why I need to say that. This is the ending. I don't know what to